Welcome to Canada, a user's guide and owner's manual.
Many people want to fix this broken down machine called government. So join with me every week as we create an owner's manual to help people understand what these parts are, how they're supposed to fit together, and how to troubleshoot, maintain, and fix this broken down machine.
Well, once again, thanks for joining with me. Today, we'll be speaking about how our established political parties are once again trying to pull the wool over the eyes of Canadians. As we all know, recently, Donald Trump has declared or announced that he wants Canada to fix our immigration and border problems and or face tariffs and possible annexation. Of course, in historical fashion, our established political parties have said, let's not go down and have a talk about our immigration and border problems, but let's sacrifice our Western provinces, especially Alberta, and let's turn off the taps of Alberta's wealth, their oil and gas, and or put retaliatory tariffs on our oil and gas. Of course, Alberta Premier Daniel Smith has said that's not in the cards, and has also said that this could be a national unity crisis. Here to speak with me on this subject, and whether it is a danger and a risk, or is it an opportunity for Canadians to take advantage of. Joining with me today are Wabbit and Marty, a couple of Canadian veterans and freedom fighters will be joining with me. And I also have the esteemed and well-spoken professor of law in Canada, Bruce Party. So Marty will be partying with Bruce today.
Right on.
Thanks, everyone, for joining with me. So let's start off, Bruce, if you don't mind. The other night we had a Twitter space on this subject, and you brought up the idea that this could be a very advantageous opportunity for Canadians to take advantage of. So, please explain that if you would.
Thank you, Randy. Thanks for having me on. I think this is opportunity. So we have a lot of problems in this country, as you have alluded to, and the Americans do too. The American problems are, they have a better shot at fixing their problems, and in part because of the constitutional order that they have. The fact of the matter is that their constitution is better than ours. The Westminster system, has worked for a long time, but it has proven to be not as architecturally sound as the one in the U.S. And so one of the ways that we would benefit from joining the United States, and we can get into details later because I don't think it should be done as a country, not as a single unit. But one of the advantages of joining the U.S. is that we would get to be citizens of a country that has the U.S. Constitution, a constitutional republic, as opposed to a Westminster-style monarchy. And the American system has some flaws in it for sure, but it could well be, and Julius Ruchel has spoken about this, it could well be that the enterprise of entering the country might give us opportunity even to propose to the Americans that they fix the flaws in their constitutional order as one of the conditions or steps along the way to adding Canadian provinces as states to the U.S. And so this is a fantastic moment. If we had people in leadership positions who were able to seize it in a way that would allow the present leadership in the U.S. to realize their objectives. And those objectives might include, taking pieces of Canada in, but also to achieve their American political aspirations, as in defeating the deep state. There are some changes you could make to the U.S. Constitution that would diminish the powers of the administrative state. And the people who are coming into power in the U.S. might be enthusiastic about that prospect. And so we kill two birds with one stone. We would get to be citizens of a country which is a constitutional republic, and they would get the advantages of having the opportunity and the rationale and the excuse and justification for changing their constitutional order, just tweaking it so as to realize their political objectives. So in all kinds of ways, and of course more than this, I think it's a great door opening that we should be prepared to walk through.
Well, thanks, Bruce. But you're speaking in a logical and rational and reasonable fashion, and you've left off the sentimental and the emotional aspect of rallying around the flag that our established political parties want us to, who have plundered the middle class for decades here and destroyed our identity, but now we're to be all sentimental and rally around the flag that they've.
Well, so here's a way around that. If you want to persuade the Canadians who want to rally around the flag, I would put it to them this way. You're not really rallying around a flag. You're rallying around our ruling class. You are protecting our ruling class from losing their power over you. Is that the thing you really want to? Is that the hill you want to die on? The people who would benefit the least from these ideas are the people in Canada who think of Canada and their provinces as little fiefdoms. The entrenched powers in Canada are going to be adamantly against this, because right now they are big fish in a relatively small pond. And the objective would be to make them tiny fish in a bigger pond. And they're going to be, of course, completely against that. But those Canadians who want to be free people in a free country, you are not that right now in Canada.
Well,
and your choices are to reform Canada or to look south to see if you can become a freer person anyway, in a different setup than we have right now. And I think that's the best possibility. Constitutional reform in Canada alone is going to be very, very difficult, almost impossible. But we have an opportunity here to seek it for the U.S. and for ourselves all in one go.
Right on. So we've got a couple of former Canadian vets here, Wabbit and Speyer. What do you think of Bruce's comments here about how we're using this to rally around the flag, where in fact we're rallying around the political class, and how they're promoting this idea that forget the reason and the logic and let's just approach this from a sentimental and emotional point of view?
Yeah. Hey, Randy, thanks for having us on. Bruce, I just whispered over to Wabbit. I'm like, I think me and Bruce just became best friends. So I was happy to jump in on this one. I actually wrote on my phone. I'm like, I got this. So thanks for having us on, first and foremost. It's really great. And I have to agree with Bruce's sentiments. Like I am a combat veteran. I've got a lot of, background. I'm decorated and which really means nothing. I can't even get a free coffee at Tim Hortons. But I think some of the perception on this becomes relevant in the fact that the service to the country, a lot of people respect. So I need people to understand that first and foremost before I say what I'm about to say. My loyalty has always been to our country. It's always been to the flag. That's been my history. That's what I did for the government. But I have to agree with Bruce. I think this gives us an incredible opportunity, and I think a lot of people, they're just looking at that's not right. I'm Canadian. And I think there's been a perception in the past for a lot of years that somehow, because of this make belief that we've sat above and we've kind of rode the higher ground on many things, and we're sorry about everything and we're super nice, and people believe that our identity is truly what defines us. But I also believe that this invisible line that was created was created by the same people that are the ruling class that are causing us problems and difficulties now. So the same people that divided the countries, divided continents, are the same people that had me fight in different wars, and the same people that were willing to sacrifice me and my friends for their own personal agendas. So in Bruce and mentioning different freedoms and what that potentially looks like, I do believe that the notion of the Constitution in the United States is the one thing that is strong enough to be able to move us through some of these difficult times. And I've had this discussion even specifically with my wife, and she's like, well, I don't want to not be Canadian. I'm like, well, here's the thing. We were born into that. That's what we know. And that same system that we've got used to and that we've grown used to, the veil around it and everything like that, is the very thing that's causing us issues today. And I think we need to look outside the box. I think that we need to consider what actually is being put on the table, not from our hearts, but actually using our minds as well too, because that brainwashing of being Canadian makes you something special. It is not nearly as important to me as what I've seen, which is we require freedom. We talk about it, we think, and we believed imaginarily. That's not even a word. I don't know. We believe, from historically that being Canadian or having that maple leaf on our backpack makes us look somehow different when we're traveling around the world. That's what we're told. But the reality is we're in the same corrupt system that's around the world, and we need to do something about it. And I think that Constitution does allow for that. And I think we need to think about this very seriously and consider, do we need that invisible line? What does it really mean? Right. And hopefully that made sense. But, to me, I was tracking you really well there, Bruce. And to me, I think this is really important that we look at it from an intellectual side, from a fact that, this could be an opportunity for us to do something different, because what we have been doing has been fake. It's been fake news. It's been a lie. It's been a facade, a deception. And I think we have to look at strengthening ourselves to actually fight the good fight. And how we do that is to get in line with the people that are trying to do that. And one of them appears to be Donald Trump right now.
Right on. But listen, before we get into what we can do about this, Bruce, if we can ask, we've seen, this was pretty clear. Trump stated, fix your borders, fix your immigration, or else face tariffs and possible annexation. And the immediate response from our political class was not to say, well, geez, Donald, let's have a talk about these important matters that you've raised, but let's rally around this flag. Let's talk about retaliatory tariffs, and as I said earlier, once again, sacrifice the extremities and protect central Canada. What do you make of that in both a historical sense and just as a rational Canadian saying, what's your view? Why are they doing this?
Yes, well, I think Robert alluded to it. That this is an emotional political response designed for the ears of Canadians that those leaders think will support them in rallying around the flag. It's pretending like this is a political fight between two equal sovereign countries, and the Canadians will strike back as because they have the ability and the strength to do so. Well, that's not true. Canada is a much smaller country than the U.S., and we have made ourselves dependent on the United States. Whether or not that was inevitable is an open question, but it is the fact right now. And so threatening to put retaliatory tariffs as a countermeasure is laughable, intellectually laughable. Makes no sense, especially if you're going to put tariffs on your leading export and sacrifice your Western provinces in the doing. There's nothing to be gained by having a tariff fight with the U.S. Donald Trump holds the cards, and he sounds like he plans to use them. And so the best thing to do, in my books, is to think how you can turn this danger into opportunity, which is what we're talking about. Yeah. The knee-jerk reaction that you've heard from our political leaders, I think, frankly reflects the reality that these are not the people to lead us through this period.
Yeah, I think there's no question. But from my read of our history as well, Bruce, it's this is not the first time we've had these sorts of spats. But it seems we always fall into the same emotional, political distraction. We've in the 1800s, Wilfrid Laurier, with reciprocity. And of course, in the 1980s with Brian Mulroney, and both political parties. What I find interesting here is both political parties have championed or been both opponents and supporters of trade battles, but they will always, at the end of the day, play this emotional, sentimental card for their own political protection. It's and it might be that we'll fall for this political gamesmanship once again in this country.
Well, so part of the things we have to get over is the decision that our forefathers made that was different than the decision that the American forefathers made. So there was a moment in time where George Washington invited the Canadians to come on board with their revolution and to reject the rule of the crown. And our forefathers said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to be loyal to the crown. And frankly, with the benefit of hindsight, that was the wrong call. We could have been a continental country that adopted a Republican form of government without being under the thumb of a monarch. And there were interests in Canada that were determined not to do that. And we insist upon the myth that Canadians and Canada are morally superior in some way to the Americans and their history. And that simply does not stand up to scrutiny.
I think the moral superiority is some part of that is derived out of this idea that we weren't rebels and that we had greater loyalty. Going back to the American War of Independence and this exodus of United Empire loyalists from the colonies. And I think in large part, when I look at that was the class, the ruling class of the colonies, the ones who were deriving the benefits from the largesse of the British Empire in the colonies, and had benefited from that system, were the ones who were going to lose the most with independence.
Yes.
And they needed a safe haven.
Yes.
And to continue deriving their benefits from the crown.
That's exactly right.
And I think we came up with a term to sort of disguise that, or something in our early days called the family compact and the Shadow Clique. And I think they're still here, just we call them the Laurentian elite now.
That's correct. And if we're not careful, we're going to make the same mistake today that we made back then. We're going to preserve their interests, thinking that we're preserving, our heritage and our interests and our liberty. Actually, that's probably not the case.
Well, we'll turn it over to Wabbit and Speyer. What's your thoughts on that discussion?
On which part of the discussion? You guys are bouncing around a bit.
So much. So good.
So far I've just been listening Bruce, just so we're aware, Speyer, Wabbit. I switched the names around up there so it was less confusing. But I'm obviously of more hearts and minds aligned with like what Speyer was saying and probably what Bruce is saying here as well. However, like when we actually look back at it, I was actually trying to look up the MP that refused to swear allegiance to the crown back in the 1800s and was actually subsequently jailed because of it. We recently had a town in Canada that did the same thing. Now, mind you, they had their different reasonings behind it because many of them were Indigenous as opposed to on the town council. But that conversation is starting in terms of separation from the crown. Even looking at the flag that you were bringing up earlier, I mean, really, the flag, it only came about 10 years before I was born, like 1965. So the Canadian flag is not an old-time thing for us actually to be rallying behind. It's just a new design. And like right behind you, you have the red ensign there that actually still has that still has the the Union Jack, thank you, on it as well, showing the constant allegiance to the crown from way back when. Now, people can sit there and they can argue the subtleties of the Queen coming in 1982 and signing over our Constitution, but ultimately every single institution that we have, from the military to every single MP to every single MPP to lawyers to basically all the institute to police, swear allegiance to the crown, not to the people, not to the Constitution. And this is something that I've spoken to you at length on about before, Randy. And even when we talked about it, there's so many different things that to try and look at the solutions on moving away from that and actually rewriting the Constitution. Like this is going to be a 16, 20, 30-year process if we still go down the line that we are. And that's if Canadians align themselves completely with that kind of agenda, where we're now being offered something. I think this is actually we're looking at gift horse in the mouth, and we're not taking it as seriously as I think we actually could in terms of looking at all those solutions. Another point that was brought up the other day was senatorships. And I think that was actually one of the things that sparked your interest in really thinking about it and talking about it, Randy, was depending on how many states were actually adopted through Canada being annexed or being brought into the U.S., each one of the biggest problems within our political institutions as it stands right now and as the laws come down the line is that our senators are appointed, and they're appointed for life. They're appointed up until the age of 75. We currently have a lot of very young senators that have just recently been appointed, and it is heavily, heavily left-leaning. I mean, there's 89, I think, identified liberals and liberal donors that are currently within the senators. They are set up as a stopgap, obviously, and there are certain things, but our laws cannot be passed unless they go through the senators. And looking at that, we don't vote for them. So really, our laws, we're not even voting for our laws as it stands to have them passed. Whereas if we were brought in, and let's say, for example, we had at minimum 10 states, and I know somebody tried to argue back against that the other day, but 10 states, 10 new states, that's 20 senators. That's 2 senators per province or per state that we suddenly actually are able to vote in. And we really actually get a chance to dictate the types of laws that our individual states actually have. I think that's something huge that Canadians are ignoring by just completely doing away with the conversation and saying, no, I like my allegiance is to the flag. Well, exactly what you said there, Bruce. If your allegiance is to the flag, then your allegiance is to the powers that be. It's not to the people. Right. And I think people should have a much heavier look into it. And actually, our space that we had the other day, Randy, a lot of people came back to me afterwards, the Twitter space that we had, and said, like, from the entire aspect of just discussing it, it was probably one of the most respectful spaces that they've heard in recent times, rather than people just shouting over each other. So kudos to you for running that.
Yeah, and I just sorry, Randy, just a kind of other thing, just another, I don't know if it sparks some interest or not, but as he talks about like some of the different changes that could be available, I mean, let's look at where a lot of people right now feel very uncomfortable, very vulnerable because of the opportunity for like a martial law. I don't know how many times you've heard that sort of stuff brought in, especially it was big during the COVID times, right? But I mean, down in the States too, I mean, they have National Guards within their own individual states and stuff like that could produce a lot more security for people living in individual states. So say, for instance, somewhere like Alberta, right? They had their own National Guard that was controlled by their own interest within that state or province as it is now, right? I mean, that could bring a lot more security to people, that they have protection within their own individual groups. I've certainly felt that down in the States. I worked a lot with Americans overseas. I worked with a lot of Americans down in the States on the individual basis. And that's one thing that they talk about, specifically the National Guard guys. we're here to protect the best interest of where we live.
Well,
right. No one's going to basically go over top of us. And I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of legalities and what that might look like, but I know that's a lot of people's fears about what could happen from a military look or a kinetic look if the States was to overtake us. And I think the importance to look at the American model is in its totality. What's the word I'm looking for? Totality would be really important, and that could be a thing.
Sorry, one last point as well. Sorry, it's your podcast, and we're just talking over you. One last point as well, there, Randy. Just quickly is you and Bruce had both brought it up earlier in regards to losing our cultural identity or something along those lines. And Speyer just brought up the aspect of Texas having their own National Guard and everything else. Well, that's something in and of itself. Like, has Texas lost their? But because Texas joined after the 13th, so after the initial they joined a little bit later. And Texas, it's still called the Republic of Texas. So did they lose their identity by joining the U.S.? Did they lose their culture? And has their culture really they are Texas American? We're Canadian North American. If we drop the North, is it really going to be that big a deal?
Yeah, listen, I think that's agreeable. Like the people in Newfoundland and the people in Quebec are not going to cease to be Newfoundlanders and Quebecers. And I think this is an important element for the audience. This is the way I view it anyway. When I have traveled across this country, every province has a preeminent or predominant local culture and affiliation. Whether it's the Newfies or whether it's the Blue Nosers or the Herring Soakers or whichever, that is the predominant.
The Acadians.
That's the predominant identity. The Canadian identity is subservient or subordinate to that local identity.
Secondary.
It is only in Ontario,
yes,
where we see
correct.
that's
right.
The people here don't identify as Ontarians, which is a pretty weird way to. We identify as Canadians, like that.
That's because Ontario thinks it is Canada.
Well, Ontario does believe fully that it is Canada, and so I think that's. But I did want to get into this. Bruce, the other day we were talking about, many people are speaking about the dangers and the risk. And I think there is a danger and risk if Canadians aren't engaged or if Canadians allow themselves to be duped by our political class.
Yes.
But I think even more importantly that needs to be articulated is the opportunity that this presents itself. And I'll speak directly, the Clarity Act, each of our provinces do have the authority within our Constitution to separate.
Yes.
And they do have that authority to not only separate, but if they want to attach themselves to some other jurisdiction.
Yes.
And I think this is the opportunity. Of course, there's some, and you can speak to the criteria about this, but if Canada, or should I say more importantly, Ontario, decide that we will sacrifice Alberta's prosperity and wealth to advance or protect the Laurentian elite here, what's your view? I think that Danielle Smith, this is an opportunity for her to not only use a referendum for separation, but also use a referendum potentially for constitutional amendments.
Sure.
We can speak to that Clarity Act and the law surrounding that.
Right. So I don't think we should think of this as the proposition that Canada as a unit is going to join the U.S. It's not going to happen that way because certainly our federal political interests are never going to go along with that. So you have to do this one province at a time, probably. My colleague Larry Sullivan has suggested this, that really it should be done 2 provinces at a time. And so, for example, he suggests Alberta and Newfoundland, just for the sake of argument, right? Provinces, our experience with Quebec separatism has led us to the point where we actually have some rules, vague rules, but rules about how provinces are entitled to leave, both from the Supreme Court in the Quebec Secession Referendums and in the Clarity Act. Now, it's just a statute, but we have at least some propositions, and the propositions go like this. If the people of a province elect to leave in a referendum with a clear question, then that province can't leave unilaterally without negotiating with the rest of the country, but the rest of the country, including the federal government, can't unilaterally prevent them either. So if you had movements in, say, Alberta and Newfoundland that said, you know, we're fed up with this, you're taking advantage of us, we haven't had a fair shake for years, we want out. And if you had Danielle Smith, for example, put a referendum up with a clear question about whether Alberta wanted to leave Confederation and whether it wanted to join the States, and if the population of Alberta said yes in a clear referendum with clear numbers, then you'd now have a mandate to do exactly that. Now, sure, there would be negotiations required and so on, but the rest of Canada couldn't say, no, you can't do that. And what you had, just imagine this, and if you had Alberta and let's say Newfoundland take the first step, then my guess is that would start a cascade. You know, once you've got 2, the rest, you know, will follow one by one. I suspect Ontario would be the last province standing because their interests, their Laurentian interests, are the ones who are going to be most adamantly opposed to this. And who knows? Maybe Quebec will decide finally to become its own country. Don't know. But you start with 1 or 2, and it's a much easier constitutional and political task to perform. So don't think about it as the country. Think about it as Alberta. Let's just start with that. How possible is it that the people of Alberta would at least contemplate the idea of leaving Canada, which has abused the province for a long time, and think about joining the US where they'll get a much better deal?
But would that referendum, could it be like a 2-part referendum? Because first off, and maybe I'll ask this question first. Does Canada have the constitutional authority to unilaterally put tariffs or restrictions on a province's natural resources?
Well, you know, it might, because the federal government has jurisdiction over borders, over international trade, over everything that falls outside the country. Essentially, that's where the constitutional authority lies. So there's going to be there could be a constitutional crisis that arises if the present federal government insists upon putting tariffs on Alberta oil exports to the U.S. I'm not saying that they wouldn't legally be permitted to try to do that, but and let me put it this way: we might all be better off in the long run if they tried to do that, because the reaction from Alberta might be, we are not going to put up with this, and therefore we're going to leave, and that will start the trek towards this destination.
So, and there's nothing that would prevent like a 2-step referendum.
Nothing would prevent it. No.
Alberta could put a 2-part referendum to remove Ottawa's authority on restrictions on natural resources, or an elected and equal Senate to protect. Or separation, or
part of the problem here is that our Constitution is so difficult to amend in those respects and others. So if you're going to amend the Canadian Constitution with respect to its common and central features, the makeup of the Senate, for example, the amending formula for that kind of thing is very, very difficult, essentially impossible. And so the only real way to achieve this U.S. integration thing is to do it one province or two provinces at a time, because there's precedent for that as to how you can leave Confederation. And maybe ironically, doing that is actually easier than changing the Canadian Constitution. So don't go down the road of trying to amend our Constitution in order to achieve these things, or even to achieve the integration with the Americans.
Don't try to fix
I think that's an important view, and just, if I would say it will be easier to leave Canada than to fix what's wrong.
Exactly so. Yes, correct.
And
I got a couple questions. If that's for just to put to Bruce there. One, if a province chose to, let's say they did a referendum, like this is, again, we're speaking in hypotheticals here, but
yes, of course.
If a province chose to leave, separate from Canada, would provincial lines be redrawn? And like, because of like currently owned federal lands or crown land, as well as actually to put into it the treaties, the treaty nations, because Alberta is mostly made up of three treaty nations, right? So I'm assuming that those treaties would have to be redone under the U.S. Constitution, or joining with the U.S., or just I hate to say it, but annihilated altogether. Or because ultimately, what do they make up in Alberta? Like 6% of the population. So it would come down to a bit of that. But in addition to that, would that actually allow for Ontario, for example, using Ontario as an example, just because it's one of the most relevant to myself living here. Would it also give an opportunity to actually divide up provinces into new states or provinces or territories, whatever you want to call them? It's always been my thought that Ontario really should be 3 separate provinces from south to north, but and some other people have different insights into that, just because of cultural, financial, and a variety of other reasons. But would that actually allow for that within those kind of negotiations?
Well, we're into new territory here, so the short answer is nobody knows.
All right,
it's possible, but once you're into the political realm, and this is what essentially would be the case, then it really depends upon who's involved and what the people say and what the powerful say, and as long as you satisfy what appear to be the legal requirements as the Supreme Court has set out to launch you on the way to the ends that we're speculating about, then the answer is, well, maybe, who knows what the outcome's going to be. And I think we should not try too hard to determine exactly what the end result is going to be, because we don't know that.
That's a good point. We're barely at the beginning.
Right, exactly. You start at the beginning, and you acknowledge what the hurdles are. And right now the hurdles are, as I was describing, which is, you start with contemplating a referendum with a clear question, and you put it to the people of your province. And if you have enough support for the idea that they're fed up with the way things are in this country, and they will contemplate leaving, and maybe with the thought of joining the U.S., well, then now you've got something to work with. You've got a political situation that could conceivably result in the kind of thing that we are contemplating. But a lot of things are up in the air. So when Quebec was proposing to separate, one of the many questions that was on the table is, well, okay, so does Quebec get to take the whole land mass that it has now around the borders as they presently exist, or does Quebec get to take with it only the borders that it had when it entered Confederation? And nobody knew the answer.
Very small.
So there's a lot of unanswered questions. But I hope we will not let those unanswered questions stop us from exploring going down this route.
So
you got. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Randy.
Maybe you can clarify something for me as well, Bruce. I believe BC and Alberta have referendum legislation in place. I'm not sure if I'm speaking correctly on that. Do you know?
I'm not sure either.
Okay. I believe that's true, and I'm just wondering. This is not something that I don't believe that this is something that has to be left into the hands of the ruling class to initiate. That people
Fair.
themselves can, outside of the established political parties, move and advance the idea of a referendum of self-determination within their own provinces.
It wouldn't be legally binding, but what they would be doing is they would be demonstrating that the people of the province think a certain way, have certain political preferences. And what you're trying to do is to illustrate to the people who are powerful in your province that their interests lie with going along with what the people want. So in other words, let's take Danielle Smith, for example. If the people of Alberta were able to mount their own kind of referendum or the like, to show to Danielle Smith and the UCP that they want this, and that Smith and the UCP would be better off as the governor and the government of a state, the state of Alberta, than they would be of the province of Alberta. I mean, there's no reason why Danielle Smith cannot be the governor of the state of Alberta. Mm-hmm. That would be great. And if the people can show their present government a path to being the government of the new state, well, then that's in both of their interests, and that's the kind of thing that the people who are interested in this should try to contemplate illustrating to the people who are in power.
Robert, you were going to add in something before.
Well, it's just Spires. We're of like mind, so I'm assuming he's probably going to say something similar. But it's interesting that Danielle Smith is she's the topic of many conversations right now. But it's very interesting that rather than the prime minister, who did go down to his credit, I guess, and kind of got kicked in the ass. Mar-a-Lago, but that it's actually almost I don't think it's happened in the past where a premier versus which would be the equivalent of a governor has actually gone down to visit with a president coming on board, or the elected president, or one that's about to be sworn in to have face-to-face meetings with them. It's like this has never happened before. So that, and it's combined to that she's been invited to the inauguration as well. None of the other premiers have. None of the other premiers have even stood up to go down and try and have those conversations, which kind of personally I think need to be had, because they need to. They've been following chain of command, I guess, in the scope of things, but ultimately they don't have to answer to Trudeau. But Danielle Smith, she's been down there. She's been having those conversations. And I think she's doing the right thing for Alberta. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but Speyer has something to say as well.
Yeah, great points. I mean, we spoke about that last night. I guess my point was a little bit different where I was going, but we should certainly tie that into Danielle Smith's visit. I think it's incredible. I love that she's taking some initiative. Obviously, there's some sort of plan there, or at least something in the works. Trump does nothing without intent. That's clear, I think, probably to everybody. There is a plan. He's been specific that it's not kinetic and that it's more economic, but there is a plan, and somehow she falls into that. Otherwise, as he's preparing for all the things
a week before he's
right. I mean, they've got him on trying to stop wars and trying to confirm picks, and amongst all that time, he meets with Danielle Smith, the premier from Alberta. I'm sorry, there's got to be something more to that, in my opinion. And I think part of that comes down to a lot of people talk about this 51st state like it's the United States, gobbling up Canada. I don't think that's exactly what Trump's saying. And when I've been listening to, the people that have actually taken the opportunity, some of the things he's talked about, considering things like universal healthcare, considering things like parity on the dollar, some of these things, income tax, like where he's looking at doing that within the states, and the hints about abolishing income tax and moving towards American tariffs. Now, if we were united as a continent, truly the strength of North America, that would put us in a very different situation. And I think what people need to do is they need to put their flag down. And when I say things like that, people
pick up a book.
Or use common sense, right? I mean, that's a term that's being used a little bit too much, so I'll maybe stop with that one. But I think that what people need to do is actually consider what the offer could be, what it actually could look like. And it's crazy, because every time I mention stuff like this, people come on and, oh, you're a traitor. I'm like, no, I'm a Canadian combat veteran that I'm tattooed with my country on my sleeve, and I'm considering it. You know what I mean? I'm considering looking at what's potentially available, and I think that people don't. It's just an ignorance. It's hiding under their flag. It's not supporting their countrymen. It's not supporting their people. When I signed the paper to join the Canadian military, I signed, truly, actually.
But in your heart, it was for the people.
Aaron's right. Our allegiance was to the crown, but not for me. You know what I mean? My allegiance, in doing that, was a step so that I could protect the rights and freedoms of Canadians and my brothers in arms. And so the very same way that I say we need to look at this, we need to consider maybe what's on the table. To me, that supersedes a piece of cloth. I'm sorry, you know what I mean? But let's be honest. And that piece of cloth means a great deal to me. I won't say that lightly. I'm almost even shaken just even saying the words out loud, right? But the reality is that the people that have been causing us a lot of the problems in our country are the same ones that created the mess that we're in, which means we need to consider other options. And especially if we don't want this to go kinetic, we need to think common sense. Nope, we need to consider all options in totality of what the offer might be.
Let's not forget, 3 years ago they demonized that flag. If you were flying that flag, you were a misogynist. You were a bigot. You were a racist. They basically likened it to the Nazi flag. 3 years ago. Like, everyone in Canada seems to have very short memories, but that's exactly what was going around. If you had that flag flying on your vehicle, you were likely to get your vehicle keyed.
Yeah, no, it's true. Actually, I was kicked off Parliament for actually carrying the Canadian flag. Yep. That's a true story at the convoy. Good point, Aaron. Good point.
This again speaks to the hypocrisy and the contradictions of all our political parties. That yes, for over a year, all our institutions and all were instructed to fly the flag at half-mast out of our shameful past over residential schools. Many people were fined and targeted for carrying the flag on the street. It was during the Emergency Act, it was outlawed to be downtown Ottawa or anywhere in Ottawa carrying the flag. But now, once again, it's time to rally around it. And I want to just get to, I see this as a great opportunity. Many Canadians have been demoralized. Many Canadians feel that they are helpless and just snowflakes waiting for the next wind the next political wind to take them somewhere.
Right.
But here's an opportunity for Canadians to work either inside the political system or outside of it to develop referendums and demonstrate their participation, their engagement in the system, and show our political elites that there is a potentially a groundswell of interest to fix what's wrong with this country, and use a referendum process first off to pressure our provincial premiers potentially, and then second off to well, yeah, guys, we do actually have a constitutional crisis because you plundered the middle class for so long.
Yes.
You've been destroying our families. You've been destroying our freedoms. Homelessness is the fastest rising demographic, in addition to mental health disorders and obesity, and in a flood of rampant immigration that has been diluting our Canadian identity for many decades. So,
Sure.
do you want to take advantage of this or not?
Yeah. Can we put this the other way around? So
Yep.
this is so people want to be loyal to the idea of the country that they have in their heads, but that's not the country they actually have now, right?
You said the other day.
COVID revealed the country we actually have, and rather than people betraying their country, what's actually happened is that our ruling class have betrayed us, and it changed the country into something else, and it's going to be very hard to get it back. So let's not pretend we're protecting and defending and rallying around something that does not in fact exist. If we are people who are interested in being free people in a free country, then the prospect of doing that right now in this country as it presently exists is not very good, because our elites are dead set against it. They appear to be. So let's be loyal to the idea that we have about liberty and look to the best route to obtain it, which I think is the opportunity that is now knocking.
Well, listen, I want to thank everybody for joining with me. I think it would be a wonderful outcome if we made the big fish the little fish.
Yes.
And
Hunters become the hunted.
and maybe make them even smaller and smaller fish than what they want to be. Bruce Wabbit Speyer, I want to thank you. I think this is an opportunity for Canadians. I think it is the greatest risk we run is by doing nothing and waiting for the political establishment to be our voices and to be to express their protection rather than and allow them to continue their plunder. I think if this is that's the great risk. The great opportunity is that we can become engaged and actually get out of this constitutional paralysis, and maybe referendums are the way to do it. Thank you very much for joining with me today, and we'll look for any last comments before we wrap it up. Speyer and Wabbit.
Just to what Speyer was just alluding to, and he was shaking me because of what Bruce was saying, is I think a lot of Canadians are stuck on the idea that Canada is somehow going to be able to go back to the 80s and 90s, to that time of fruit and honey and milk and honey, whatever you want to call it. That when that innocence was there, and what's happened particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, but was kind of leading up to that as well, is people have started educating themselves more, and kind of learning more about the world around them. And the thing is like, once Speyer put it in one very eloquent way the other day, is a lot of people swallowed that red pill, woke up, and it got stuck in their throats, and now they want to cough it up and swallow the blue pill. We can't do that. We can't rewrite history. We can't go back to where we are, but we can remake it anew. And we have that, as you said so eloquently there, Bruce, is we have that opportunity kind of knocking right now. And I think we'd be unwise to ignore it and just shout it down, rather than discussing it as we're doing here today. So I thank you both for the opportunity to speak today.
Yeah, no, really well put. And we discussed this in detail, which is so great. It was amazing. That's why, I was so excited to hear that you had the same ideas around that. So, and another thing that I think is important to consider is that I think as Canadians, we need to look at exactly what's being there. We see what, Trump mentioned Greenland and stuff as well. My understanding is that went to a vote. 68% of people in Greenland said that they were open to the notion with the information that they had initially. And, I've seen a lot of different things like that and different polls that have been put out. And I think, if people had the right information and were given an opportunity, then I think, it would be a great opportunity for Canadians to be able to act instead of waiting and reacting, right? I think it gives us an opportunity to potentially elicit change, which we're not going to do by, trying to let a broken system fix itself. So I really think we need to look at exactly what's offered. I know it's I know there's a plan. I just don't know what it is, and I think we need to wait for a little bit, but then I think we need to also act and create a way forward. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you both, Bruce. It was really nice to hear some of your reflections, and Randy, it's always a pleasure to hear most of the things that come out of your mouth.
Well, listen, and Bruce, final comments before we
I agree with all of that. Maybe I'll just add, look, it's important, of course, not to be naive about what might be ahead. But it's even more important not to be naive about the country that we have. But not to see it with rose-colored glasses, but to see it as it actually is. And so there's as we've all been saying, there's lots of opportunity here. We should not turn away from it because it's staring at us in the face. Let's do this.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. And I'll just remind everybody to like and share if you enjoy these conversations in Canada, A User's Guide and Owner's Manual. And if you'd like to help out, you can go to nomorelelockdowns.ca, or if you want to follow me on my uncensored Substack, it's randyhilliard.substack.com. And until next week, we'll see you once again. Welcome to Canada, A User's Guide and Owner's Manual.
Many people want to fix this broken down machine called government. So join with me every week as we create an owner's manual to help people understand what these parts are, how they're supposed to fit together, and how to troubleshoot, maintain, and fix this broken down machine.